The first time Florence Caldwell stepped foot in the mining town of Silver Creek, Colorado, in the spring of 1876, whispers followed her like persistent shadows, clinging to her skirts and seeping into the dusty air around her. The scandal had traveled faster than she had, racing ahead on telegraph wires and hushed conversations between stagecoach drivers. Florence kept her gaze forward as she made her way down the town's main street, ignoring the stares that burned into her back. The journey from Boston had been long and arduous but necessary. There was nothing left for her in the East, not after what had happened. "That's her," a woman whispered too loudly to her companion, "the one who was caught with the married banker." Florence's cheeks burned, but she continued walking, clutching her small valise tightly. The allegations weren't true, not in the way they claimed, but truth seldom mattered once rumors took hold. She had been a bookkeeper at Harrington Bank, nothing more, Mr. Harrington's advances had been unwanted, his threats when she refused him vicious. When his wife discovered his obsession, it was Florence who bore the blame, ruined, unworthy. The words had been flung at her in Boston society, and now they followed her here, 3,000 miles away. The boarding house at the end of the street was her destination, a modest two-story building with a small sign advertising rooms for respectable ladies. Florence almost laughed at the irony. Would Mrs. Abigail Peterson, the proprietress who had responded to her letter seeking accommodation, still consider her respectable once the gossip reached her ears? As she approached the porch steps, the door swung open. A stern-faced woman with gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. "Mrs. Peterson?" Florence asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "Miss Caldwell, I presume?" The woman's eyes were cold. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I run a respectable establishment, and after what I've heard this morning." She shook her head firmly. "We have no room for you here." Florence felt as though she'd been struck. "There must be some mistake. We corresponded. You confirmed. That was before I knew of your character, Mrs." Peterson's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. "Good day, Miss Caldwell." The door closed with a decisive click, leaving Florence standing alone on the street, her last hope crumbling around her. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she felt lightheaded from the altitude and the crushing weight of despair. "You look like you could use a drink of water, madam." The voice came from behind her, deep and unhurried. Florence turned to find a tall man leading a chestnut horse. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see his eyes remarkably blue against his sun-darkened skin. "I'm fine, thank you," she said automatically, though her parched throat betrayed her. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine." He stepped closer, and she could see him more clearly now. Broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, dressed in worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. A cowboy, by the look of him, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the western sun. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Florence said stiffly. A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Forgive my manners. Adam Reeves, madam. I run the Circle R ranch just outside of town." He touched the brim of his hat. "And you would be Florence Caldwell." She hesitated, waiting for the recognition, the change in his expression when he connected her name to the gossip, but his face remained open and warm. "Well, Miss Caldwell, if Mrs. Peterson's turned you away, you might try the hotel down the street. It's not as proper as the boarding house, but it's clean enough." "I doubt they'll be any more welcoming," she said bitterly before she could stop herself. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, news travels fast in Silver Creek." "Too fast," Florence agreed, feeling suddenly exhausted. "I should have chosen a more remote location." "Wouldn't have mattered much," Adam said with a slight shake of his head. "Folks out here are starved for news and gossip. It's the entertainment when you're 1,000 miles from anywhere." A woman passed by, openly staring at Florence before hurrying into the general store, no doubt to spread more gossip. "I suppose I'll have to continue on to the next town," Florence said, trying to keep the defeat from her voice. Her funds were limited, and she had counted on finding work in Silver Creek. Adam Reeves studied her for a moment, seeming to come to a decision. "My sister-in-law is looking for help at the ranch. She's expecting a baby in a few months and could use an extra pair of hands." Florence blinked in surprise. You're offering me employment? You don't even know me. I know you've traveled a long way and been treated poorly since you arrived, he shrugged. Besides, my brother's wife is a good judge of character. If she doesn't take to you, you'll be no worse off than you are now. It could be a trap, Florence thought. She'd learned the hard way that men's offers of assistance often came with unspoken expectations. But something in Adam Reeves's straightforward gaze made her hesitate. Why would you help me? She asked bluntly. Because I've seen how quick folks are to judge. Something hardened in his expression momentarily. And because my mother raised me to offer a hand to those in need. Florence glanced around the town that had already rejected her, then back at the cowboy waiting patiently for her decision. What choice did she really have? When would we leave? She asked. Relief crossed his face. Now, if you're willing, I've finished my business in town. I have nowhere else to be, Florence said, attempting a smile. Adam nodded and took her valise, securing it to his saddle. I'll walk beside you. It's about 5 miles to the ranch. As they started down the street, Florence was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Outside the general store, a cluster of townspeople had gathered, watching their progress with undisguised interest. Reeves, a sharp voice called out. You know who that is you're escorting? Adam stopped and turned slowly. The man who had called out was portly and well-dressed, with the air of someone used to being listened to. Mayor Wilson, Adam acknowledged with a nod that held little respect. That woman is Florence Caldwell, the mayor said loudly, as if announcing it to the gathering crowd. She was involved in a scandal back east, ruined a marriage and a man's reputation. We don't need her kind in Silver Creek. Florence felt herself shrinking under the public accusation, shame burning through her despite her innocence. Is that so? Adam asked mildly. It is, a woman chimed in Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house. I heard it from my cousin in Denver who got it straight from Boston. She's unworthy to be among decent folk. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, and Florence wished desperately that the ground would open up and swallow her. This was Boston all over again, but worse somehow because she had foolishly hoped for a fresh start. Well now, Adam said, his voice carrying easily over the murmurs, that's mighty interesting. He paused, and Florence braced herself for his withdrawal, for him to step away and leave her to face the crowd alone. Instead, he surprised her by deliberately reaching out and taking her hand in his. The gesture was unmistakable in its meaning, a public declaration of support in the face of their condemnation. Miss Caldwell has accepted a position at the Circle R, he announced clearly, and she'll be under my protection while she's there. The crowd fell silent at his declaration. Adam Reeves might be a cowboy, but Florence could see from their reactions that he held influence in this town. You're making a mistake, Reeves, Mayor Wilson warned. Wouldn't be the first time, according to some, Adam replied with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. He turned to Florence, still holding her hand. Shall we, Miss Caldwell? Florence felt something unfurl inside her chest, a tiny, fragile hope. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As they walked away from the stunned crowd, Adam released her hand but remained close by her side. I apologize for taking such a liberty, he said quietly, but sometimes these folks need a clear message. Thank you, Florence managed. No one has stood up for me since. Well, in a very long time, people are quick to believe the worst, he said. Especially about women, it's not right. They continued in silence for a while, leaving the town behind and following a dirt road that wound through stretches of open grassland. The mountains loomed in the distance, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the afternoon sun. May I ask what really happened in Boston? Adam finally asked. Florence hesitated. Why do you assume the rumors aren't true? He glanced at her with those startlingly blue eyes. I've found that when everyone's eager to condemn someone without hearing their side, there's usually more to the story. The simple wisdom in his words loosened something in Florence's chest. She had been carrying the weight of false accusations for so long, unable to defend herself to those who had already made up their minds. I was a bookkeeper at Harrington Bank, she began. Mr. Harrington, the owner, began to pay special attention to me. At first, I thought he was simply being kind to a new employee, but his intentions became clear when he cornered me one evening after everyone had left. Adam's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. I refused him, of course. He was married, and even if he hadn't been. She shook her head. He didn't take the rejection well. He began to make my work difficult, finding fault with everything I did. When I threatened to tell his wife, he laughed and said no one would believe me over him. But somehow his wife found out anyway, Adam guessed. Yes, she came to the bank one day and saw how he looked at me. She confronted him, and Florence's voice caught. He told her I had been pursuing him, that I had threatened to claim misconduct if he didn't reciprocate my affections. And people believed him. He was a respected businessman. I was just a woman working for wages. Who do you think society would believe? Adam's expression darkened. I'm familiar with that particular injustice. They walked in silence for a moment before Florence continued. Mrs. Harrington made sure I was dismissed immediately. She also made sure everyone in Boston society knew of my shameful behavior. No other bank would hire me. No respectable establishment would even consider my application. The bitterness crept back into her voice. I used nearly all my savings to come west, hoping for a new beginning. Only to find that rumors travel faster than stagecoaches, Adam concluded. Exactly, Florence sighed. I'm beginning to think there's nowhere far enough. The West can be hard on women, Adam acknowledged. But out here, actions eventually speak louder than words. If you're given half a chance to prove yourself, folks might come around. Is that what you're offering me, half a chance? I'm offering you a full one, he said simply. The rest is up to you. They continued walking, and Florence felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. For the first time since the scandal broke, someone had listened to her story without immediate judgment. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it felt monumental after months of being condemned without a hearing. As they crested a small rise, a sprawling ranch came into view. A large main house constructed of logs and stone stood in the center, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a corral near the barn held several horses. Welcome to the Circle R, Adam said, a note of pride in his voice. It's beautiful, Florence said honestly. After the cramped streets of Boston and the dusty mining town, the open spaces and rugged beauty of the ranch took her breath away. My father started it with just 20 head of cattle and a dream, Adam told her. My brother Frank and I built it up after he passed. Frank married Alice 3 years ago and they live in the main house with me. As they approached, a woman appeared on the porch, slender with auburn hair, her pregnancy just beginning to show. She waved at Adam before her gaze settled curiously on Florence. You've brought company, she called as they reached the yard. Alice, this is Miss Florence Caldwell, Adam said. Miss Caldwell, my sister-in-law, Mrs. Alice Reeves. Alice stepped forward with a warm smile. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Caldwell. Have you come from town? Miss Caldwell needs employment and lodging, Adam explained. I thought of your mention of needing help with the house and garden before the baby comes. Alice's eyes lit up. Oh, yes, indeed. Can you cook, Miss Caldwell? Reasonably well, Florence answered. I'm better with figures and correspondence, but I can manage a household. That's even better, Alice said enthusiastically. The ranch accounts are in terrible disarray since I've been feeling poorly. Frank tries, but numbers aren't his strength. Don't tell him that, Adam said with a grin. He thinks he's quite the businessman. Alice laughed, a bright, melodious sound. Come inside, Miss Caldwell. You must be exhausted from your journey. As Florence followed Alice into the house, she couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected turn of events was too good to be true. The Reeves seemed genuinely kind, but experience had taught her that kindness could evaporate quickly once rumors took hold. Still, as she glanced back at Adam Reeves, who had taken her hand before them all in town, defying their judgment, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a place where she could begin again. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. While lacking the ornate furnishings Florence had grown accustomed to in Boston's finer homes, it possessed a warm, lived-in quality that immediately put her at ease. Polished wooden floors stretched through the main rooms, and a large stone fireplace dominated the central living area. "Frank is out with the hands moving cattle to the north pasture," Alice explained, leading Florence to a small but tidy bedroom off the kitchen. "He'll be back for supper. You can meet him then." "This is very generous," Florence said, setting her valise on the bed. "I want to be clear that I intend to earn my keep," Alice smiled. "Adam seems to think you're capable, and that's good enough for me. He's an excellent judge of character." Florence wasn't so sure about that. After all, Adam had known her for less than an hour before bringing her home like a stray cat, but she kept that thought to herself. "There's fresh water in the pitcher," Alice continued. "Rest if you'd like. Supper's at 6. After Alice left, Florence sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. That morning, she had stepped off the stagecoach hoping for a fresh start. Instead, she had faced rejection and public humiliation, only to be rescued by a cowboy who seemed to trust her on sight. It was bewildering. She splashed water on her face and changed from her travel-stained dress into the only other one she owned, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days. Her wardrobe, like her finances, had diminished significantly since the scandal. When she emerged from her room later, she found Alice in the kitchen, struggling to reach a high shelf. "Let me help you," Florence said, easily retrieving the container Alice had been reaching for. "Thank you," Alice said, slightly breathless. "The baby makes everything more difficult, though it's barely showing yet." "Is this your first?" Florence asked. "It is." Alice's face softened with joy. "Frank and I have waited 3 years for this blessing." Florence smiled, ignoring the small pang in her heart. At 26, she had once hoped for a family of her own, but those dreams seemed increasingly remote now. "May I help with supper?" she offered. "Absolutely. You can peel those potatoes while I finish the biscuits." They worked together companionably, and Florence found herself relaxing for the first time in months. Alice was easy to talk to, asking questions about Florence's journey west but never prying into her past. As they worked, Florence heard the front door open and the sound of men's voices. A moment later, Adam entered the kitchen, accompanied by a man who strongly resembled him, though he was slightly shorter and broader through the shoulders. "Frank, this is Miss Florence Caldwell," Adam said. "She'll be helping Alice until the baby comes." Frank Reeves stepped forward with a friendly smile. "Welcome to the Circle R, Miss Caldwell. Any help for my wife is much appreciated." Florence nodded politely, noticing that Adam hadn't mentioned the circumstances of their meeting. She wondered if he would tell his brother about the scene in town later in private. "Wash up, both of you," Alice directed. "Supper's nearly ready." The brothers obediently disappeared, returning a few minutes later with clean hands and faces. They all gathered around the large oak table, and Frank said a brief grace before they began passing dishes. "How are things in town?" Alice asked as they ate. Adam glanced briefly at Florence. "Same as always, Mayor Wilson strutting around like a bantam rooster." Frank snorted. "That man's still sore about losing the water rights case last year. He seems to hold considerable influence for a small town," Florence observed. "Money talks," Frank said. "And Wilson's got plenty between his mining interests and the bank he controls." Florence stiffened slightly at the mention of a bank. "He owns the bank in Silver Creek, owns it, runs it, and uses it to keep half the businesses in town under his thumb," Adam explained. "Not a man you want to cross if you can help it, which we've done repeatedly," Frank added with a grin. "The Reeves family and the Wilsons have a history," Alice explained to Florence, "going back to when Adam and Frank's father first settled here." "Ancient history," Adam said dismissively, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. "How are the cattle looking in the north pasture?" The conversation shifted to ranch business, and Florence listened with interest. It was clear that the Circle R was a successful operation, with several thousand head of cattle and a reputation for good breeding stock. The brothers discussed plans for the upcoming cattle drive to Denver, where they would sell most of this year's calves. After supper, Florence insisted on helping Alice with the dishes despite the other woman's protests. "You must be exhausted from your journey," Alice said. "Keeping busy helps me feel settled," Florence admitted, "and I'm eager to be useful." As they worked, Florence could hear the brothers' voices from the porch where they had gone to smoke. Though she couldn't make out their words, the tone suggested a serious conversation. She suspected Adam was explaining the circumstances of her arrival. "Adam mentioned you're good with figures," Alice said, drawing Florence's attention back to the kitchen. "The ranch books are in that cabinet. If you'd like to look them over tomorrow, I'd be grateful." "Frank tries, but he's more comfortable with cattle than columns of numbers." "I'd be happy to," Florence said. "I was a bookkeeper in Boston before." She stopped abruptly. Alice hung a dish towel to dry. "Before you came west, yes, Adam mentioned that." Her expression was kind. "Whatever brought you here, Miss Caldwell, you're welcome at the Circle R." Florence felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you, and please call me Florence." "Florence it is then," Alice agreed with a smile. "Now you should get some rest. Mornings start early on a ranch." Later, as Florence lay in the narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, she found herself thinking of Adam Reeves. His kindness to a stranger had been unexpected, especially given how quickly the rest of the town had turned against her. What kind of man extended his trust so readily? And why did the memory of his hand holding hers before the entire town make her heart beat a little faster? Foolish thoughts, she chided herself. He had merely been offering assistance to someone in need, nothing more. Florence knew better than to read anything deeper into a man's actions. That path led only to disappointment and pain. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, it was Adam's startlingly blue eyes and quiet strength that followed her into her dreams. The following days fell into a rhythm that Florence found both challenging and rewarding. True to Alice's word, mornings on the ranch began early. By 5 o'clock, the men were already seeing to the livestock while Alice and Florence prepared breakfast. The ranch books proved to be in worse condition than Alice had implied. Records were incomplete, expenses were haphazardly documented, and there appeared to be no system for tracking income against expenditures. Florence dove into the task with enthusiasm, grateful to be using her professional skills again. "This is remarkable," Frank commented on her third evening at the ranch, reviewing the ledger she had reorganized. "I can actually understand where our money's going now." "Your cattle operation is quite profitable," Florence told him, "but your expenses for fence repair last quarter were unusually high." Frank and Adam exchanged a look. "We've had some trouble with cut fences on the north border," Adam explained. "Probably Wilson's men, though we can't prove it." "He wants that land badly," Frank added. "The creek that runs through it would double his water access." "Could he not simply purchase it from you?" Florence asked. Adam's expression hardened. "He's tried, we refused." "That land has been in the Reeves family since our father homesteaded it," Frank explained more diplomatically. "It's not for sale at any price." Florence nodded, understanding family legacy. "Well, if the fence cutting continues, you might consider hiring an additional hand specifically to patrol that section. It would be less expensive than continuous repairs." Adam looked at her with newfound respect. "That's sound thinking." Florence felt a warmth spread through her at his approval. "It's simple mathematics. Prevention costs less than repair." As the days passed, Florence found herself increasingly comfortable at the Circle R. Alice was unfailingly kind, treating her more like a sister than an employee. Frank was good-natured and appreciative of her help with the accounts. And Adam? Adam remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain distance. Sometimes she would look up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, only for him to look away when their eyes met. Other times, he seemed to deliberately avoid being alone with her. 2 weeks after her arrival, Florence was hanging laundry in the yard when she noticed a group of riders approaching. As they drew closer, she recognized Mayor Wilson at the front, accompanied by several men she hadn't seen before. "Alice," she called through the open kitchen window. "We have visitors." Alice appeared on the porch just as Frank and Adam emerged from the barn, clearly alerted by one of the ranch hands. The brothers positioned themselves in front of the house, presenting a united front as the riders approached. "Wilson," Frank greeted coolly. "What brings you out this way?" The mayor dismounted, his expansive girth making the movement awkward. Reeves, he acknowledged. Just being neighborly, heard you had a new addition to your household. His gaze slid to Florence, who stiffened under his scrutiny. Miss Caldwell is helping Alice with the household and our accounts, Adam said, his voice neutral but with an underlying edge. Is that what they're calling it these days? One of Wilson's companions said with a smirk. Adam took a step forward, his expression darkening, but Frank placed a restraining hand on his arm. State your business, Wilson, Frank said firmly. We've got work to do. Wilson smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Just thought you should know that having a woman of questionable character associated with your ranch might impact your standing in the community. Our standing is just fine, Adam replied coldly. For now, Wilson agreed. But reputations are fragile things, especially when you're looking to sell cattle to respectable buyers. He adjusted his hat. Just something to consider. Florence felt ill. Once again, her past, or rather, the lies about her past threatened not only her future, but now the livelihood of the people who had shown her kindness. Miss Caldwell's character is not in question at the Circle R, Frank stated firmly, and we don't appreciate implications otherwise. She's a known home wrecker, Wilson persisted. Drove a good man to ruin back east, ask anyone in town. I don't need to ask anyone in town, Adam said, his voice dangerously quiet. Unlike some, I form my own judgments based on what I observe. Wilson's face reddened. Careful, Reeves. Your father may have been a founding settler, but times change. The days when cattle barons ruled this territory are ending. Banking and mining are the future. Is that a threat? Frank asked. A friendly observation, Wilson replied smoothly. I'd hate to see the Circle R suffer because you're harboring damaged goods. Florence couldn't bear it any longer. She stepped forward, ignoring Alice's attempt to stop her. Mr. Wilson, I understand your concern for the community's welfare. If my presence at the Circle R is causing difficulties, perhaps don't, Adam interrupted, turning to her with such intensity that the words died in her throat. Don't let him drive you away. The look in his eyes, fierce protection mixed with something deeper, left her momentarily speechless. Wilson watched the exchange with calculating eyes. Well, I see how it is. He turned back to his horse. Just remember, Reeves' choices have consequences. Especially poor ones. As the visitors rode away, an uncomfortable silence fell over the yard. Florence felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her. These good people had taken her in, and now they were facing threats because of it. I should leave, she said quietly. I won't be the cause of trouble for you. Nonsense, Alice said firmly, coming to stand beside her. Wilson is a bully who's used to getting his way. We don't bend to bullies at the Circle R. Frank nodded in agreement. Alice is right. Wilson's been trying to force us to sell that north section for years. This is just his latest tactic. Only Adam remained silent, his gaze fixed on the retreating riders, his expression unreadable. Adam, Frank prompted. Adam turned, his eyes finding Florence's. You're staying, he said simply. Wilson does not dictate who is welcome in our home. The conviction in his voice stirred something inside her, a feeling she had thought long dead after the humiliation in Boston. It was dangerous, this growing attachment to a man who had already done too much for her. She couldn't afford to mistake kindness for something more, not again. Thank you, she managed to say, but I don't want to be a burden. You're not, Adam said firmly. You're an asset to this ranch. Your work with the books alone has been invaluable. It's settled then, Alice declared. Now let's not let Wilson ruin a perfectly good day. I believe those shirts are getting overly dry in this wind, Florence. As Florence returned to the laundry, she was acutely aware of Adam watching her, his gaze like a physical touch against her skin. When she glanced up, he didn't look away this time. Instead, he held her gaze for a long moment before turning to follow his brother back to the barn. That evening, Florence found it difficult to concentrate on the account books. Her mind kept returning to the moment Adam had stopped her from offering to leave. Don't let him drive you away. The intensity in his voice, the look in his eyes, it suggested a personal investment that went beyond mere employer and employee. A knock on the door of the small parlor she was using as an office interrupted her thoughts. Adam stood in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. May I come in? He asked. Florence nodded, suddenly nervous. Of course. He entered, closing the door partially behind him enough for propriety, but allowing their conversation to be overheard if necessary. Florence appreciated the consideration. "I wanted to apologize for Wilson's behavior today," he said, remaining standing. "You have nothing to apologize for," Florence replied. "His actions aren't your responsibility." "Perhaps not, but I brought you here. I should have anticipated his response." Adam ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Wilson isn't one to let things go easily." "Why does he want your land so badly?" Adam's expression darkened. "It's not just about the water rights, though those are valuable enough. There's a rumor that the railroad might be coming through this area. If it does, whoever controls that north section will be in a position to profit substantially." "I see," Florence said, "and he believes you and Frank might be persuaded to sell if your business prospects suffer." "Something like that." Adam hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Frank and I are planning to ride into town tomorrow. There's a shipment of supplies we need to pick up, and we need to speak with our lawyer about some paperwork for the upcoming cattle drive." Florence tensed. "I understand. It would be better if I remain at the ranch." "Actually," Adam said, meeting her eyes directly, "I'd like you to come with us." She stared at him in surprise. "After today, that seems unwise." "Hiding away only gives credence to Wilson's accusations," Adam said firmly. "If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to hide from." "It's not that simple," Florence protested. "People believe what they want to believe, regardless of the truth. My presence will only create more difficulty for you and Frank." Adam stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Florence, I've been watching you these past 2 weeks. You work hard, you're honest, and you've been a tremendous help to this ranch. I won't have Wilson or anyone else in town making you feel unwelcome or unworthy." The use of her given name the first time he had used it was not lost on Florence, nor was the determination in his voice. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Adam seemed taken aback by the directness of her question. For a moment, he appeared to struggle for words unusual for a man who typically spoke with such confidence. "Because I know what it's like to be judged unfairly," he finally said. "And because I believe in standing up for what's right, especially when it's difficult." There was more to it than that, Florence sensed, but she didn't press him. Whatever his reasons, his support meant more to her than she cared to admit. "All right," she agreed. "I'll accompany you to town tomorrow." Adam nodded, satisfaction and something like relief crossing his features. "Good, we'll leave after breakfast." He turned to go, then paused. "Florence." "Yes, don't let them make you feel unworthy," he said quietly. "You're not." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her with a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety about the coming day. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with the promise of heat later in the day. Florence dressed carefully in her blue dress, the same one she had worn her first day at the ranch. She had washed and pressed it meticulously, wanting to present herself as respectable despite its simplicity. Alice appeared in her doorway as she was pinning up her hair. "May I come in?" "Of course," Florence said. Alice entered, carrying something draped over her arm. "I thought you might like to borrow this for your trip to town." She held out a lovely cream-colored shirtwaist with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "It's beautiful," Florence said, touching the fine fabric. "But I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Alice interrupted with a smile. "It's a bit snug on me these days, and it would complement your coloring beautifully. Besides, there's something empowering about facing your critics in your finest attire." Florence hesitated only a moment longer before accepting the garment. "Thank you, Alice. That's very kind." "It's entirely selfish," Alice replied with a twinkle in her eye. "I want the women of Silver Creek to see that the Circle R employs only the most elegant of bookkeepers." Florence laughed, feeling some of her anxiety ease. "I'm not sure I qualify as elegant, but I appreciate the vote of confidence." A short while later, dressed in Alice's shirtwaist paired with her own skirt, Florence joined the brothers in the yard where they waited with the wagon. Frank helped her up to the bench seat, and Adam took the reins. "You look very nice, Miss Caldwell," Frank commented as they set off. "Thank you," Florence replied. "Alice was kind enough to lend me the shirtwaist." "My wife has excellent taste," Frank said proudly. As they traveled, Florence couldn't help but be aware of Adam beside her, his arm occasionally brushing hers as he guided the horses. He seemed preoccupied, his usual easy manner replaced by a certain tension. "Are you concerned about the reception we'll receive in town?" she asked quietly while Frank was distracted by something in the distance. Adam glanced at her. "I'm concerned about your comfort, not what anyone in town thinks." "I've faced worse than small town gossips," Florence assured him, though her churning stomach suggested otherwise. "You shouldn't have to face it at all," Adam said, a hint of anger coloring his words. "Not for something you didn't do." His unwavering belief in her innocence continued to surprise Florence. "How can you be so certain?" she asked. "You've only known me a short time." Adam was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "My mother was accused of something similar when I was a boy," he finally said, his voice low enough that Frank couldn't hear. "A wealthy rancher claimed she had pursued him. It wasn't true he was angry that she'd rejected his advances, but people believed him because of his position." Florence's heart ached at the revelation. "What happened?" "My father believed her without question, stood by her." A small, sad smile touched Adam's lips. "It cost him some business relations, but he never wavered. He taught me to judge people by their actions, not by rumors." "Your father sounds like a remarkable man," Florence said softly. "He was." Adam's voice held both pride and grief. "I think he would have liked you." The simple statement warmed Florence more than it should have. She fell silent, contemplating this new understanding of Adam's character and his motivations for helping her. As they approached Silver Creek, Florence felt her anxiety returning. The town looked much as it had 2 weeks ago, dusty streets lined with wooden buildings, people going about their business. Only now, instead of being a newly arrived stranger, she was the subject of established gossip. Adam guided the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. "Frank, why don't you handle the supply order while Florence and I visit Mr. Callahan about those contracts?" Frank nodded, understanding the strategy. By splitting up, they would present less of a target for gossip. "I'll meet you at Callahan's office in an hour." Adam helped Florence down from the wagon, keeping her hand in his a moment longer than strictly necessary. The gesture did not go unnoticed by passers-by who stopped to stare openly. "Ready?" Adam asked quietly. Florence took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." They walked side by side down the boardwalk toward the lawyer's office. Florence kept her head high, despite the whispers that followed them and the openly hostile stares from some of the townswomen. She was acutely aware of Adam beside her, his presence both reassuring and somehow amplifying her nervousness. As they passed the Silver Creek Hotel, a group of women exited, stopping abruptly at the sight of them. Florence recognized Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house among them. "Well, I never," one of the women exclaimed loudly. "Adam Reeves, you ought to be ashamed parading that woman around town." Adam stopped, turning to face the women with a cool politeness that barely masked his irritation. "Good morning, ladies. Beautiful day, isn't it, Mrs. Peterson sniffed disapprovingly. It was until certain elements appeared. Florence felt her cheeks burning but forced herself to remain composed. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson," she said calmly. "I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face in town after what you did," another woman said. "Decent women don't destroy marriages." "No, they don't," Florence agreed evenly, "which is why I can face you with a clear conscience." Adam placed a hand lightly at the small of her back, a silent show of support. "If you'll excuse us, ladies, we have business with Mr. Callahan." As they turned to continue on their way, Mrs. Peterson called after them, "You're ruining the Reeves family reputation, associating with her kind. She's unworthy of decent company." Adam stopped so abruptly that Florence nearly bumped into him. He turned slowly, his expression thunderous. For a moment, Florence feared he might say something they would all regret. Instead, to her astonishment, he reached for her hand, clasping it firmly in his. "Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the gathering crowd, "is a woman of intelligence, integrity, and remarkable courage. She has my complete trust and respect." His grip on her hand tightened. "Anyone who suggests otherwise insults not only her but me as well." A stunned silence fell over the onlookers. Florence stood frozen, overwhelmed by his public declaration. Now, Adam continued, still holding her hand, if you'll excuse us, we have actual productive matters to attend to, unlike those who spend their days inventing falsehoods about their neighbors. Without waiting for a response, he turned, guiding Florence away from the speechless group. He did not release her hand until they reached the lawyer's office, and even then he did so reluctantly. "I apologize if I overstepped," he said quietly as they waited for the clerk to announce them. "You didn't," Florence assured him, still trying to process what had just occurred. "Thank you for defending me," Adam's expression softened. "Always." That single word, spoken with such conviction, sent a tremor through Florence's heart. It was dangerous to read too much into it, she knew. Adam was a principled man who would stand up for anyone he believed was being treated unjustly. Still, the way he looked at her suggested something more personal than abstract justice. Their meeting with Mr. Callahan was mercifully straightforward. The lawyer, a thin, scholarly man in his 50s, treated Florence with perfect courtesy, showing no sign that he was aware of or concerned by the gossip surrounding her. They were reviewing the contracts for the cattle drive when Frank joined them, looking somewhat harried. "Everything all right?" Adam asked his brother. "Wilson was at the store," Frank said with a grimace, "making sure everyone knew his opinions about our new bookkeeper." Florence's heart sank. "I'm causing you both so much trouble." "Wilson is causing the trouble," Frank corrected firmly, "and he's not succeeding. Jeffries at the store told him to mind his own business, said our money spends the same as anyone else's." "Really?" Adam looked surprised. "Really," Frank confirmed with a slight smile. "I think not everyone in town is as convinced by Wilson's rhetoric as he believes." This small victory buoyed Florence's spirits as they finished their business with Mr. Callahan. As they prepared to leave, the lawyer drew Adam aside for a private word. Florence couldn't hear what was said, but she noticed Adam's expression grow serious as he nodded. Outside, as they walked back toward the general store to collect their supplies, Florence spotted a familiar figure across the street, Mayor Wilson, watching them with undisguised hostility. Beside him stood a well-dressed man she didn't recognize, who was studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "Who is that with the mayor?" she asked quietly. Adam followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Samuel Harrington," he said grimly. "He arrived on yesterday's stage from Denver." Florence felt the blood drain from her face. "Harrington," she whispered. "It couldn't be a coincidence." "Do you know him?" Frank asked, noticing her reaction. Before she could answer, Adam spoke. "Mr. Harrington from Boston," he said, his voice hard. "Am I right?" Florence nodded, feeling suddenly light-headed. "But why is he here?" "That's what Callahan was telling me," Adam said, placing a steadying hand at her elbow. "Apparently, Wilson telegraphed him when he learned your name, invited him out to address the situation, whatever that means." Samuel Harrington, the man whose unwanted advances and subsequent lies had destroyed her reputation and livelihood, was here in Silver Creek. Florence felt ill at the thought. If he was here, it could only mean he intended to continue the persecution he had begun in Boston. "I need to leave," she said urgently. "If he's here, he'll only spread more lies. You don't understand what he's capable of." "We're not running," Adam said firmly, "and we're certainly not letting him drive you away." "Adam's right," Frank agreed, his usually affable expression hardening as he looked at the two men across the street. "The Circle R doesn't bow to bullies, whether they're local or imported from back east." Florence wanted to believe in their confidence, but fear gripped her heart. Samuel Harrington had the power and influence to destroy more than just her reputation, if he turned his vindictiveness toward the Reeves family. "Let's get our supplies and head home," Adam decided, steering her toward the general store. "We'll deal with this situation properly, not in the middle of the street." As they entered the store, Florence was aware of curious glances but was too preoccupied with thoughts of Harrington to care. The storekeeper, Mr. Jeffries, greeted them pleasantly enough, confirming Frank's earlier assessment that not everyone in town shared Wilson's views. They loaded their purchases into the wagon quickly. As Adam helped Florence up to the seat, she noticed Harrington and Wilson watching from the boardwalk of the hotel. "Ignore them," Adam advised, climbing up beside her. "They're trying to provoke a reaction." The journey back to the ranch was tense. Florence sat rigidly between the brothers, her mind racing with fears of what Harrington might do. She had believed herself safe in the West, far from his reach. That illusion was now shattered. What exactly did Mr. Harrington do in Boston? Frank asked eventually, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Florence hesitated. She had told Adam the basics of what happened, but had spared him the more disturbing details. Now, with Harrington in Silver Creek, full disclosure seemed necessary. He was my employer at the bank, she began. He developed an inappropriate interest in me. When I rejected his advances, he became angry, vindictive. She took a deep breath. He began to make my work life difficult. Small things at first: criticism of my penmanship, accusations of minor errors. Then he began to touch me when no one was looking: my hand, my shoulder. Nothing I could object to without seeming hysterical. Adam's hands tightened on the reins, but he remained silent, letting her continue. One evening, he cornered me in the filing room after everyone had left, Florence continued, her voice growing quieter. He tried to force himself on me. I fought him off, but in the struggle, a shelf was knocked over. The noise brought the night watchman. Harrington immediately claimed I had been attempting to seduce him. Bastard, Frank muttered. The watchman believed him, of course. Why wouldn't he? Harrington was a respected businessman, and I was just a female employee. Bitterness crept into her voice. After that, Harrington told his wife I had been pursuing him. She believed him too. She made it her mission to destroy my reputation in Boston. And now he's followed you here, Adam said grimly. Why, what more could he want? Florence shook her head. I don't know. Perhaps he fears I'll tell the truth and be believed. Perhaps he simply can't stand the thought that I escaped the punishment he felt I deserved for rejecting him. Well, he's made a serious miscalculation coming here, Frank declared. The Circle R stands behind its own. Florence was touched by his words, by the way both brothers had unquestioningly accepted her as part of their household. But she couldn't shake the dread that had settled in her stomach. Harrington was not a man to be underestimated. When they reached the ranch, Alice was waiting anxiously on the porch. Thank goodness you're back, she said as they pulled up. I've been worried sick since Eddie rode in with the news. Eddie, one of the younger ranch hands, had apparently been in town earlier and had hurried back to warn Alice about Harrington's arrival. Inside, Florence related the story once more for Alice's benefit, including the confrontation with Mrs. Peterson and the other women. The nerve of those busybodies, Alice fumed, as if they've never faced a day of adversity or misunderstanding in their lives. It's Harrington who concerns me more than the local gossips, Adam said, pacing the length of the living room. What's his game? Why come all this way? Revenge, most likely, Florence said quietly. Men like him can't tolerate being defied. Adam stopped pacing, his expression resolute. Whatever his intentions, he won't succeed. I promise you that, Florence. The fierce protectiveness in his voice both comforted and unsettled her. Part of her wanted to believe in his promise, to trust that he could shield her from Harrington's malice. But another part, the part that had learned hard lessons about trusting others, feared that Adam's determination would only lead to his own downfall. I appreciate your support, she said carefully. All of you, but I don't want to be the cause of trouble for this family. Perhaps it would be best if I moved on. Absolutely not, Alice said firmly. That's exactly what men like Harrington and Wilson want: to isolate you, to make you feel that you have no allies. Alice is right, Frank agreed. Running won't solve anything. It would only confirm their lies in the eyes of the town. Adam had been watching Florence intently during this exchange. Now he stepped forward, his expression serious. Florence, do you want to leave? Not because you're afraid of causing us trouble, but because you genuinely wish to go. The directness of his question caught her off guard. Did she want to leave? The Circle R had become more of a home to her in 2 weeks than anywhere had been since she left her parents' house years ago. Alice's friendship, Frank's easy acceptance, the satisfaction of work well done in Adam. Adam, whose belief in her had never wavered, whose presence made her feel both unsettled and secure. No, she admitted softly, I don't want to leave. Relief flashed across Adam's face. Then it's settled. You're staying and we'll face whatever comes together. The conviction in his voice made it sound so simple. But as the day wore on, and Florence returned to her work with the account books, she couldn't shake the feeling that Harrington's arrival signaled the beginning of a storm that would test them all. That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, haunted by memories of Boston and fears of what tomorrow might bring. Eventually, she gave up, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and slipping quietly outside to the porch. The night was clear, the stars brilliant in the vast Colorado sky. Florence leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool air scented with pine and sage. How different from the close, smoky air of Boston, where even the stars seemed dimmer, smothered by the city's glow. Couldn't sleep, she started at the voice, turning to find Adam approaching from the barn. He must have been doing a final check on the livestock. No, she admitted, too many thoughts. He came to stand beside her at the railing, close but not touching. Harrington, partly, Florence sighed, and everything else, the women in town, Wilson, the danger to your family's standing. Our standing is just fine, Adam assured her. The Circle R has weathered worse storms than the disapproval of a few gossips. Harrington is more than a gossip, Florence said quietly. He's vindictive and used to getting his way. So is Wilson, Adam replied. Neither of them intimidates me. Florence turned to look at him, studying his profile in the moonlight. Why are you doing this, Adam? Really? Why risk so much for someone you barely know? Adam was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and contemplative. When I saw you that day in town standing alone, facing their judgment with such dignity, despite your fear, something in me recognized something in you. He turned to meet her eyes. Courage, integrity, a refusal to be broken by circumstances beyond your control. Florence's breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. And then, he continued, when I heard your story, it reminded me so much of my mother's, how one man's lies nearly destroyed her, how my father's unwavering support was the only thing that saved her from complete ruin. His voice softened. I could not help you, Florence, it wasn't a choice. Because of your mother, she asked, needing to understand. At first, perhaps, he acknowledged. But now, he hesitated, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Now it's because of you, who you are, what you've come to mean to this ranch. To me, the last two words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Florence felt her heart beating faster, hope and fear warring within her. Adam, she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. You don't need to say anything, he assured her quickly. I'm not expecting anything from you. I just wanted you to understand why I won't let Harrington or anyone else drive you away. In that moment, looking at this man who had defended her without question, who saw in her something worthy when others saw only scandal, Florence felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. Before she could think better of it, she reached out and placed her hand over his on the railing. Thank you, she said softly, for believing in me when no one else would. Adam turned his hand beneath hers, intertwining their fingers. The simple contact sent a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the mild night air. Always, he said again, that same word from earlier, but now weighted with even deeper meaning. They stood there in companionable silence, hands joined, watching the stars. For the first time since Harrington's arrival in Silver Creek, Florence felt something other than dread. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The following morning brought news that only heightened Florence's anxiety. Billy, one of the younger ranch hands, returned from an early trip to town with troubling information. Harrington's been talking all over town, he reported as they gathered for breakfast. Saying Miss Caldwell stole money from his bank before she left Boston, says that's why she ran west. Florence gasped. That's an outright lie. I never stole anything in my life. We know that, Adam said firmly, but it's a clever move on his part. Theft is a more serious accusation than the rumors about impropriety. Sheriff Tate was listening mighty interested-like, Billy added apologetically. Harrington was showing him some papers he claims are proof. Frank exchanged a worried glance with his brother. If Tate decides to investigate, he'd need more than Harrington's word, Adam said. But it's concerning. Florence felt sick. He's fabricated evidence. I know he has. There was no theft. He's trying to have me arrested. That won't happen, Adam assured her, though she could see the concern in his eyes. Frank and I will ride into town after breakfast. We need to speak with Sheriff Tate directly. I'm coming with you, Florence declared. Adam shook his head. It might be better if you stay here until we understand what we're dealing with. No, Florence said firmly. I won't hide while Harrington spreads lies about me. If he's accusing me of theft, I need to face that accusation directly. The brothers exchanged looks, and Florence could see them weighing the risks. She's right, Alice said unexpectedly. Hiding will only make her appear guilty. Frank nodded slowly. Alice has a point. All right, Adam conceded, though he looked unhappy about it. But we stay together the entire time. Agreed, Florence nodded, grateful for their support, but terrified of what awaited them in town. After breakfast, they set out in the wagon once more, the mood considerably more somber than the previous day. As they approached Silver Creek, Florence noticed an unusual amount of activity for mid-morning. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, and she could see Mayor Wilson's distinctive figure holding court on the boardwalk. This doesn't look good, Frank muttered as Adam guided the wagon to a stop a short distance away. They had barely descended from the wagon when Sheriff Tate emerged from his office, flanked by Samuel Harrington. Florence froze at the sight of her former employer. He looked much as she remembered, portly, well-dressed, with an air of smug authority that had once intimidated her. There she is, Harrington declared loudly, pointing at Florence. The thief who absconded with bank funds. The crowd murmured, all eyes turning toward Florence and the Reeves brothers. Sheriff Tate stepped forward. He was a tall, lean man with a weathered face and the cautious demeanor of someone who preferred to avoid conflict when possible. Miss Caldwell, he said, nodding politely, I'm afraid I need to ask you some questions about certain allegations that have been made. Adam moved to stand slightly in front of Florence, his posture protective. What allegations exactly, Sheriff? Mr. Harrington here claims that Miss Caldwell embezzled funds from his bank before fleeing Boston, Tate explained. He's provided documentation that appears to support his claim. Documentation he fabricated, Florence said, stepping forward beside Adam. Sheriff Tate, Mr. Harrington is lying. I never stole anything from his bank or anyone else. Harrington's face reddened with what appeared to be righteous indignation. I have ledgers and witness statements proving otherwise. This woman abused her position as a bookkeeper to siphon funds. When she was discovered, she fled rather than face justice. That's absurd, Florence retorted, finding courage in her anger. I left Boston because you destroyed my reputation with lies after I rejected your advances. Now you're compounding those lies because you can't stand that I've found a place where people believe in me. Gasps rose from the crowd at her direct accusation. Harrington's expression darkened dangerously. See how she slanders me? He appealed to the onlookers. This is precisely the pattern of behavior I described. She attempted to seduce me, and when that failed to secure her position, she turned to theft. When discovered, she resorted to scandalous accusations to distract from her crimes. That's enough, Adam said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Sheriff Tate, I understand you have a duty to investigate accusations, but I hope you'll consider the source and motivation carefully. Tate looked uncomfortable. Mr. Reeves, I respect your family's standing in this community, but these are serious allegations with apparent documentation. What documentation? Frank challenged. May we see this evidence? That would be irregular, Wilson interjected, stepping forward. Sheriff Tate must conduct his investigation properly. I'm not suggesting otherwise, Frank replied evenly. But if you're accusing Miss Caldwell based on these documents, she has a right to examine them and respond. The sheriff hesitated, clearly caught between competing influences. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in my office, he suggested, gesturing toward the building behind him. A public accusation deserves a public defense, Adam insisted. If Mr. Harrington is confident in his evidence, he should have no objection to presenting it here and now. Harrington's smug expression faltered slightly. The technical details of financial impropriety would be lost on most present, he said dismissively. The sheriff has reviewed the documents and found them concerning enough to investigate. I haven't made any determinations yet, Tate corrected carefully. I'm simply looking into the matter." "What exactly do these documents purport to show?" Adam pressed. Wilson stepped forward. "That's enough, Reeves. The sheriff has procedures to follow. Miss Caldwell will have her chance to defend herself in court if necessary." The implied threat hung in the air. Florence felt a surge of panic. Even if she eventually proved her innocence, an arrest would confirm her guilt in the eyes of many. And a trial, even one that ended in acquittal, would permanently stain her reputation and, by association, the Reeves family. "Wait," a new voice called from the edge of the crowd. The gathered townspeople parted to reveal Mr. Callahan, the lawyer, making his way forward with a telegram in his hand. "Sheriff Tate," Callahan said formally, "I've just received a response to a telegraph inquiry I sent yesterday to a colleague in Boston. I believe it's relevant to this matter." Harrington's face paled visibly. "What inquiry? On whose authority?" "On behalf of my clients, the Reeves family," Callahan replied calmly. "When they informed me of Mr. Harrington's arrival and accusations, I took the liberty of seeking independent verification." Tate looked interested. "What does it say, counselor?" Callahan adjusted his spectacles and read from the telegram. "In response to inquiry regarding Samuel Harrington of Boston and allegations against Florence Caldwell, Harrington Bank under investigation by federal authorities for financial irregularities. Harrington departed Boston suddenly last month ahead of possible indictment. No charges filed against Caldwell. Sources suggest Harrington himself responsible for missing funds." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Florence stared at Harrington, whose face had gone from pale to mottled red. "Lies," he sputtered. "That's preposterous." Was a respected banker," Callahan corrected mildly. "According to my source, your reputation in Boston has suffered considerably in recent weeks, which explains your sudden interest in pursuing Miss Caldwell all the way to Colorado." "You needed a scapegoat." Florence felt light-headed with the sudden reversal of fortune. Adam's hand came to rest supportively at the small of her back. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "it seems Mr. Harrington's accusations merit significant skepticism." Tate looked from the telegram to Harrington's now sweating face. "Mr. Harrington, is there any truth to these claims of federal investigation?" "Absolutely not," Harrington blustered, though his manner had lost its confidence. "This is a manipulation by Reeves and his lawyer. The woman is a thief and a seductress, and I can prove it." "With the same books you allegedly falsified in Boston?" Frank asked pointedly. Wilson, sensing the tide turning, attempted to regain control of the situation. "Sheriff Tate, regardless of these unsubstantiated claims from Boston, the fact remains that Miss Caldwell's reputation is not a matter for legal concern," Tate interrupted, showing unexpected backbone. "Mr. Harrington, unless you have evidence of Miss Caldwell's wrongdoing that doesn't rely solely on your own testimony, I see no grounds for further investigation at this time." "This is outrageous," Harrington spluttered. "I've traveled all this way, running from federal investigators, it would appear," Callahan noted dryly. The crowd's mood had shifted perceptibly. Where before there had been suspicion directed at Florence, now curious and somewhat sympathetic glances were cast her way. Several people were looking at Harrington with open distrust. "Well, I never," Mrs. Peterson's voice rose from the crowd. "To think we almost believed such terrible things about Miss Caldwell, when all along it was Mr. Harrington who was the dishonest one." Florence couldn't help but note the swift reversal of the woman's opinion now that the wind was blowing in a different direction. Sheriff Tate cleared his throat. "I believe we're done here, folks. Unless anyone has actual criminal matters to report, I suggest we all get back to our business." As the crowd began to disperse, many casting curious backward glances, Adam turned to Florence. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, still processing what had just happened. "I can't believe it. He's the one who's been stealing all along." "Men like Harrington often accuse others of the very crimes they themselves commit," Adam said grimly. "It's a way of deflecting suspicion." Mayor Wilson approached them, his expression sour but attempting conciliation. "Reeves, it seems there may have been some misunderstanding regarding Miss Caldwell's character." "No misunderstanding, Wilson," Adam replied coldly. Just slander and false accusations which you were eager to believe and amplify, Wilson bristled. I was merely concerned for the moral fabric of our community. Your concern is noted, Frank said dryly. Though perhaps in the future you might direct it toward actual wrongdoing rather than baseless gossip. Wilson's face reddened, but before he could respond, Harrington approached, his earlier confidence replaced by a barely contained fury. This isn't over, he said to Florence, his voice low and threatening. You think you've won, but that's enough, Adam interrupted, stepping between them. Mr. Harrington, I suggest you return to Boston and face whatever awaits you there. If you continue to harass Miss Caldwell, I'll personally see that Sheriff Tate has cause to detain you. Harrington glared at Adam, clearly measuring the cowboy's resolve and finding it unshakable. With a final venomous look at Florence, he turned and stalked away, Wilson hurrying after him with placating gestures. As they watched the two men retreat, Florence felt a wave of relief so profound her knees nearly buckled. Adam's hand at her elbow steadied her. Let's go home, he said gently. Home? The word had never sounded so sweet. The journey back to the Circle R was considerably lighter in spirit than their trip into town had been. Frank regaled them with his impressions of Wilson's and Harrington's faces when Callahan had read the telegram, and even Florence found herself laughing at his mimicry. I still can't believe Mr. Callahan thought to telegraph Boston, she marveled. Adam asked him to, Frank revealed. Yesterday, when we were in his office, said something didn't sit right about Harrington showing up out of the blue. Florence turned to Adam in surprise. You suspected he was lying about the theft, Adam shrugged, looking somewhat embarrassed by his foresight. I just thought it was worth checking his story. Men who lie about one thing often lie about others. Well, your instincts may have saved me from arrest, Florence said gratefully. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Adam cautioned. Harrington's humiliated, but that makes him more dangerous, not less. And Wilson won't forget this defeat easily. Always the optimist, my brother, Frank said with a chuckle. Despite Adam's warning, Florence couldn't help but feel hopeful. For the first time since the scandal in Boston, she had been publicly vindicated. The truth, or at least enough of it to matter, had come to light. When they reached the ranch, Alice was waiting anxiously. Her face broke into a smile of relief when she saw their expressions. Good news, I take it. She called as they pulled up to the house. The best, Frank replied, jumping down from the wagon and going to embrace his wife. Harrington's the one in trouble with the law, not Florence. As Frank related the morning's events to Alice, Adam helped Florence down from the wagon. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. I knew you were innocent, he said quietly, but I'm glad the rest of the town knows it now too. Because of you, Florence replied. If you hadn't taken my hand that first day, if you hadn't brought me here and given me a chance. She shook her head, unable to complete the thought. You would have found another way, Adam said with certainty. You're stronger than you know, Florence Caldwell. Before she could respond, Alice called them inside for a celebratory lunch. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant blur of relief and normal ranch activities. Florence returned to her work on the accounts with renewed focus, grateful for the ordinary tasks that helped ground her after the emotional turmoil of the morning. That evening, as the sun was setting, she found herself drawn once again to the porch. The view of the mountains in the fading light never failed to move her, their immense solidity, a reminder that human dramas, however all-consuming they might seem, were fleeting against the backdrop of nature's grandeur. The sound of boots on the wooden planks alerted her to Adam's presence before he spoke. Becoming a habit, finding you out here, he observed, coming to stand beside her. It's peaceful, Florence replied. After everything that's happened, I appreciate that more than ever. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the mountains in shades of gold and pink. I've been thinking, Adam said eventually. About what happens next. Florence tensed slightly. With the immediate crisis past, would he now expect her to move on? Despite the clearing of her name, she was still an unmarried woman without family connections or substantial means. What do you mean? She asked carefully. Adam turned to face her fully. Your position here was offered as temporary help for Alice during her pregnancy, but the baby won't arrive for months yet, and after that. He hesitated. I was wondering if you might consider staying on, permanently. The ranch accounts have never been in better order, and Alice values your companionship. Relief flooded through Florence. I'd like that very much, she said sincerely. The Circle R feels more like home than anywhere has in a very long time. Something shifted in Adam's expression, a softening, an openness that made her breath catch. Florence, he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words unusual for a man typically so direct. I need to tell you something, and I hope you won't think me presumptuous. Her heart began to beat faster. Yes, when I took your hand in town that first day, it was because I couldn't stand to see you facing their judgment alone, he said. But when I took it again today, it was for an entirely different reason. Florence waited, hardly daring to breathe. I care for you, Adam continued, his voice growing more certain with each word. Not out of sympathy or a sense of justice, but because in these past weeks, I've come to admire everything about you, your courage, your intelligence, your kindness despite all you've endured. Adam, she whispered, overwhelmed by his declaration. I'm not asking for anything, he assured her quickly. I know you've had your trust broken, and I would never pressure you. I just wanted you to know that my offer for you to stay isn't just about the ranch books or helping Alice. Florence looked up at him, this man who had believed in her when no one else would, who had defended her without question, who saw in her something worthy when others saw only scandal. In his eyes, she saw nothing but sincerity and a warmth that called to something deep within her. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and took his hand, much as he had taken hers in town. I care for you too, she said softly. More than I thought possible after everything that happened in Boston. You made me believe in myself again, Adam. You made me feel worthy. The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. Gently, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. You always were, he said. Always will be. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above the mountains, Florence knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a refuge, but a future one filled with possibility, respect, and the promise of love. 3 months later, Florence stood in the main room of the Circle R ranch house, making final adjustments to the ledger before the cattle drive to Denver. The ranch's finances had never been healthier, a fact that brought her considerable professional satisfaction. Everything balancing. Adam asked, entering from outside. His face was tanned from days spent in the saddle preparing for the drive, and the sight of him still made her heart skip a beat. Perfectly, she replied with a smile. The improvements to the North Pasture irrigation came in under budget, and the new breeding stock is already showing promise. That's my girl, he said proudly, coming to stand behind her chair and resting his hands on her shoulders. Always making us look good on paper. Florence leaned back into his touch. The past 3 months had seen their relationship blossom from cautious affection to deep, abiding love. Adam had been patient, understanding her need to proceed slowly after her experience with Harrington. Each day, her trust in him had grown stronger. The town council meeting went well, she asked. Since the incident with Harrington, Florence's standing in Silver Creek had undergone a remarkable transformation. Where once there had been whispers and condemnation, now there was respect, particularly after she had helped several local businesses improve their bookkeeping systems. Very well, Adam confirmed. Wilson was outvoted on the water rights issue, and Mrs. Peterson asked specifically after your health. Florence laughed at the irony. How times change, people change, Adam corrected gently. Or at least they can when given the chance to see the truth. Not everyone had changed, of course. Wilson remained coldly civil at best, though his influence in town had waned following the Harrington debacle. As for Harrington himself, they had learned through Mr. Callahan's Boston contacts that he had indeed been indicted for embezzlement and was awaiting trial. Frank and the men are ready for tomorrow's drive, Florence asked, closing the ledger. All set. We should reach Denver in 5 days if the weather holds. Adam paused, his expression growing serious. I'll miss you. "And I'll miss you," Florence replied. It would be their first separation since she had come to the Circle R, and though she knew it was routine ranch business, the thought of Adam being away for 2 weeks left an ache in her chest. "I have something for you," Adam said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until after the drive, but I don't think I can." Florence watched, curious, as he withdrew a small box covered in velvet. Her breath caught as understanding dawned. "Adam," he came around to face her, kneeling before her chair. "Florence Caldwell," he said, his voice steady though she could see emotion in his eyes. "From the moment I saw you standing alone against the judgment of an entire town, I knew you were someone special. These past months have only confirmed what my heart knew instantly." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "I love you," he continued. "Your strength, your kindness, your unwavering integrity. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, facing whatever comes together." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Florence's eyes as she looked at the ring, at Adam's hopeful face, at the future he was offering her. A future where she would never again stand alone against judgment or falsehood. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Adam, I will marry you." His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the late afternoon light that streamed through the windows. "It was my mother's," he explained as he rose to his feet, drawing her up with him. "My father gave it to her as a symbol that he would always believe in her, always stand beside her, no matter what others said." "It's perfect," Florence said, touched by the significance. She raised her hand to his cheek. "I love you, Adam Reeves." He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and a future built on trust. When they parted, he kept her close in the circle of his arms. "When I return from Denver," he said, "we'll announce our engagement properly." "Though I suspect Frank and Alice already know what I had planned," Florence laughed. "Alice has been dropping hints for weeks. She's already talking about sewing a wedding dress. Is that all right with you, a wedding this autumn once the ranch work slows down?" "It's more than all right," Florence assured him. "It's everything I could have hoped for." As Adam kissed her again, Florence marveled at how completely her life had changed in just a few short months. From the despair of that first day in Silver Creek, rejected, maligned, called ruined and unworthy, to this moment of perfect joy. All because a cowboy had taken her hand before them all. The autumn wedding of Adam Reeves and Florence Caldwell became one of the most talked about events in Silver Creek's recent history. Held at the Circle R Ranch on a perfect October day, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the blue Colorado sky, it drew guests from the town and surrounding ranches alike, even Mrs. Peterson attended, bringing a handmade quilt as a wedding gift and telling anyone who would listen that she had always seen something special in that girl. Florence accepted the revisionist history with gracious amusement, understanding that it was the closest thing to an apology she was likely to receive. Alice, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, served as Florence's matron of honor, radiant despite her unwieldy condition. Frank stood beside his brother as best man, beaming with pride and genuine happiness for the couple. As Florence walked toward Adam in the simple but elegant white dress Alice had helped create, she felt none of the uncertainty that had plagued her in the past. Each step was a confident movement toward the future she had chosen, toward the man who had seen her worth when she herself had begun to doubt it. Adam's eyes never left her as she approached, his expression a mixture of awe and profound love that made her heart swell. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, the gesture reminiscent of that first day in town, but now charged with deeper meaning. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, for her ears alone. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not just of love and fidelity, but of unwavering support and belief in each other. As Adam slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, Florence knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. The celebration afterward was joyous, filled with music, dancing, and the kind of genuine community spirit that Florence had once feared she would never experience again. Even Mayor Wilson, who had attended out of political necessity rather than goodwill, grudgingly offered his congratulations. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the ranch yard, Adam drew Florence away from the festivities for a moment of privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Reeves?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. "And grateful, Adam. So grateful for that day you found me on Mrs. Peterson's doorstep." "I'm the grateful one," he countered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Every day I thank God for bringing you into my life, Florence. You've made the Circle R more of a home than it's ever been." As they rejoined their guests for the final dances of the evening, Florence caught Alice watching them with knowing satisfaction. "You look pleased with yourself." Florence teased her sister-in-law as they stood together watching the men talking with some of the neighboring ranchers. "I am," Alice admitted without a hint of embarrassment. "From the moment Adam brought you home that day, I knew you were exactly what he needed, what we all needed, really." "Even with the scandal I brought with me?" Florence asked, only half joking. Alice waved a dismissive hand. "Especially with that. This family has never backed down from a fight worth having." She patted her rounded belly. "And now this little one will have the best aunt any child could wish for." 2 weeks later, Alice gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she and Frank named Thomas Adam Reeves. Florence found herself unexpectedly moved when they asked her to be the child's godmother, a responsibility she accepted with joyful tears. As winter settled over the Colorado mountains, the Circle R Ranch house became a haven of warmth and happiness. Florence and Adam settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both, their love deepening with each passing day. Florence continued to manage the ranch accounts, expanding her role to include correspondence with cattle buyers and suppliers. Her organizational skills and financial acumen helped the Circle R prosper even as other ranches struggled with the changing economic landscape. Adam, for his part, took pride in his wife's accomplishments, never hesitating to credit her publicly for her contributions to the ranch's success. His unwavering support and willingness to see her as a partner, rather than a possession, only strengthened Florence's love for him. One snowy evening in February, as they sat before the fire in the cozy parlor of the small house Adam had built for them near the main ranch house, Florence shared news that brought tears of joy to her husband's eyes. "A baby." He repeated, his voice filled with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "You're certain?" "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday," Florence nodded, covering his hand with her own. "Next autumn, we'll have our own little one." Adam gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't express. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed. "When my father died, I thought the best I could hope for was to keep the ranch going to honor his legacy. I never imagined I'd find someone like you." "Nor I you," Florence replied softly. "After Boston, I believed that part of my life was over, that I would never trust again, never love again." "Thank God we were both wrong," Adam said fervently. As they sat together before the fire, planning for their future and the new life they had created, Florence reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the despair of scandal and false accusation to the joy of vindication, and true love, a path that had begun the day a courageous cowboy took her hand before them all. In September of 1877, Florence gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose Reeves, Eliza for short. With her father's startling blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, she quickly became the center of their world. As the years passed, the Circle R flourished under the combined stewardship of the Reeves brothers and their wives. Florence's reputation in the region grew beyond her role as Adam's wife. She became known for her financial advice, which several neighboring ranches sought out, and for her advocacy for educational opportunities for girls. The scandal that had once threatened to define her life faded into a distant memory, replaced by the respect she had earned through her actions and character. When Samuel Harrington was eventually convicted of embezzlement and fraud in Boston, the news barely caused a ripple in Silver Creek. Florence herself received the information with a sense of closure rather than vindication. She had long since moved beyond the need for external validation of her worth. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Adam surprised Florence with a gift that brought her to tears: the deed to the North Pasture land, transferred solely into her name. "But why?" she asked, confused by the legal document. "The ranch belongs to both of us already." "This is the land Wilson tried so hard to take," Adam explained. "The land my father fought to keep. I want it to be yours, specifically and legally. A symbol that what others tried to take from you, your reputation, your dignity, your future, has been restored tenfold." Florence understood then the deeper meaning of his gift. It wasn't about ownership of land, but about reclamation of identity. The woman once called ruined and unworthy now held title to the most contested and valuable portion of the Reeves family legacy. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, deeply moved. "You don't need to say anything," Adam replied, taking her hands in his, the same gesture that had changed both their lives a decade earlier. "Just know that I have never for a single moment regretted taking your hand that day in town." "Nor I putting my trust in you," Florence said softly. "You saw me, Adam, the real me, when no one else would look past the rumors." "I still see you," he assured her, his eyes reflecting the same unwavering belief they had shown from the beginning. "And I fall in love with you a little more each day." As they sealed this anniversary promise with a kiss, their children's laughter echoed from the yard where Eliza and her younger brother James played with their cousin Thomas. The sound represented everything Florence had once thought beyond her reach: family, belonging, unconditional love. Her journey from scandal to redemption had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of pain along the way. But as she stood in the circle of her husband's arms, looking out at the life they had built together, Florence knew with absolute certainty she had always been worthy. And Adam Reeves had been the first to see it, taking her hand before them all.